Hello everyone, my name is Baryl Tlau, and today I'm going to talk about the Mizoram-Assam border row, the what, the why and the how. The topic we're going to talk today is certainly one of the most important subjects to people of India in general, and more so for people of Mizoram and Assam in particular in recent years and for generations to come for the Northeast Indians. Let us try to understand the details of today's subject best from a layman's perspective. So you may ask, who are the Mizos? In short, by Mizo, we mean to include the hill tribes in the northeast India, predominantly in the state of Mizoram and its adjacent states of India, as well as those in the neighboring hill areas of Myanmar and Bangladesh. And again, in short, the tribe is known as Mizo in India, Chin in Myanmar and Kuki in Bangladesh, whereas Mi means people, and Zo means highlands. Therefore, the word Mizo would literally mean Highlander. What we call Zonatak is basically a larger Mizo family which consists of many of the Mizo tribes or clans, each one having their own dialect, out of which Lusei, or sometimes called Dulian, is being used more or less as a common language or lingua franca by all the tribes belonging to the Mizo family. All dialects of Mizo are linguistically classed as a family of Sino-Tibeto-Burman, and anthropologically we are a family belonging to Mongoloid stock. Our forefathers had passed through many trying times and ages in the course of settling down in the present areas more or less surrounding to the present Indian state of Mizoram. We must be truly grateful to Almighty God that He had brought His people to this region, which is classified otherwise seismically as Zone 5, the most active zone in the world, yet there has been no record of a major earthquake in the state till date with any major casualty. So, the settlement of Mizos in an area surrounding the present state of Mizoram is not by chance, but by the clear choice and divine guidance, the same God who had promised a land to the Israelites too. Let us remember that the Israelites did not get their present land too easily. In the same manner, we, the Mizos, cannot be complacent in our fight to get our own Mizoram, the land of the Mizos. Mizo community being semi-nomadic in nature, the Mizos had been in fact spreading all over the chain hills of Myanmar and Chittagong hills of Bangladesh, and as well as hilly region of Tripura, Meghalaya, Assam and Manipur states bordering the state of Mizoram in India. In the process, it is important to note that we, Mizos, were the original settlers, indigenous people for all practical purposes, and hence our present Mizoram is a land gifted to us by Almighty and not a snatched away land from anybody else indeed. As such, even today, the Mizos, in spite of spreading out in 3 neighboring countries, we have been maintaining a very close, warm and high level of socio-cultural bondage in spite of all odds. Though the Britishers did apply their very own famous divide and rule policy for the ease of their administration, these blooded brothers and sisters of ours have been stepping up their brotherhood in course of times. This desire to be in touch and be together always is more evident in the present scenario of handling the Mizoram-Assam border this time around. So let me talk about pre-British India period. Prior to the onslaught of the Britishers till the mid-1800s, Mizos were maintaining their own identity by having their own small kingdoms in the form of all-powerful village chiefs as per their natural convenience of topography and the charms of each hill ranges. When the Britishers ventured into our areas, some of them came from Bangladesh, some from Kachar Plains, and some even from the Burma Plains. Even though the social life at that time was rather primitive and Jumia in nature, where shifting cultivation was their main occupation, the local administration was carried on in each village level quite independently. The chief, along with his elders, were all in all. The Britishers were in touch with the various tribes of Mizo sometime in the mid-1800s. Depending upon from which directions they had come, we were known and called names differently by the different groups of these Britishers exploiters. We were called Chin by those who came from Burma, presently Myanmar, Kuki by those who came from Bangladesh side, and largely called Mizo by those coming from Assam side. However, the atmosphere of introduction between the Britishers and Mizos were not very welcoming, even in the beginning, we may say. When the Britishers started expanding their tea garden in Kachar areas, the Mizo chiefs from far and wide, who were on a regular spree of elephant hunting, did not like to see white-skinned human beings in their territory, and petty armed fightings used to take place very often. In 1871, a British tea gardener, Mr. Winchester, was killed by a Mizo chief, and her daughter, Mary, was caught and held captive by one Sailam village chief and his team of elephant hunters. Presently, near Sertip Down, who apparently had in fact threaded all the way down to Kachar area, almost 300 km long according to present-day highways. Such was the determination and ferocity of the Mizo chiefs defending their territory. The Britishers started realizing early then that Mizos were a very ferocious tribe, and in fact, killing enemies was considered a victory trophy in their own fancied game of manhood at its peak. At the same time, precious resources like tea, oil, teak, precious stones, as had been found in Burma and Assam side, were missing in their newfound Mizo land. Hence, the Britishers were rather very quick coming to their proper senses. Since there was no economic gain, nor little or no commercial interest in their newfound Mizo land and from her people, it was therefore felt and understood very well early that it was best to play safe with their newfound neighbors. Accordingly, an agreement was made soon with the local Mizo chiefs in 1872, which has been called fondly by the Mizos as British Sarkar le Mizo lalte sa uitanna. Hence, certain understanding was made as to up to where and what for both the sides should dare to move into. As such, a memorandum of understanding of sorts was signed. Later, based on this MOU, the Bengal Eastern Frontiers Regulation Act 1873, notified later in the 1875, was drafted by the British along with a safety barrier cleverly called by the Britishers as the Inner Line Reserved Forest, measuring 509 square miles, was carved out of the northern end of Mizo territory, so that the Mizo chiefs were requested not to cross this barrier to avoid unnecessary trouble and armed fighting with the British exploiters. Later on, based on this act, the Inner Line Permit, locally known as ILP system, was also introduced, and it is still in use today. Thus, originally, creation of the Inner Line Reserve Forest was meant to stop the warring chiefs of the Mizos from interfering with the Britishers in their tea industrial activities in the plain areas. And later on, the ILP, or say the so-called Inner Line Reserve Forest barrier, was made to serve as to regulate the reverse flow of plain people, or say the mainland Indians, to the intricate tribal society of Mizoram in the form of ILP. So let's talk about the 509 square miles Inner Line Reserve Forest. As stated earlier, the background story of the making of the Inner Line Reserve Forest, 509 square miles, a British India Government Notification number 5 of 1878 under Section 34 of the Indian Forest Act, 1878 of Revenue Department, Government of Assam, was made then and there. The fact that this area of this 509 square miles Inner Line Reserve Forest was within the territory of the then Lushai Hills, now Mizoram, has been clearly established by the notification made in Form 46 Forest Department, Assam, in the year 1896-97, where a list of reserved, the unclassed state forests in the then Assam was clearly given. Moreover, the revenue statement made by Assam government under the British India in respect of this Inner Line Reserve Forest for the year 1905 to 1910 was in fact to the tune of Rs 1,77,647 and 01 anna. Further, while maintaining that Mizoram had been the rightful land owner of this Inner Line Reserve Forest, this fact had never been doubted by anybody else, including the state of Assam. A government declaration was made again on the 3rd October 1953, say till 1972, when the Mizo District Council became an union territory. Technically speaking, the inner side of the ILR forest from the Kachar side, that is the northern line Inner Line Reserved Forest, was taken as the northern boundary of the Lushai territory, Mizoram, which was therefore the southern boundary line of Kachar, Assam. Proper pillars were in fact erected at vital points on the ground during this time. Thus, the whole area of the ILR forest, 509 square miles, had been a land within Mizoram ever since the creation of this barrier of thick forest, while the Assam side, locally called the Inner Line of the Kachar, kept changing for obvious of suiting demands of the British tea industry. Not surprising at all, today the Assam government had claimed that a bigger chunk of the ILR forest area, say 289 square miles, had already been somehow snatched away, which otherwise would have been very much an integral part of Mizoram, leaving in the process a much smaller portion, say 220 square miles of the original 509 square miles only with Mizoram. This act was shielded hurriedly by drawing a brand new inner line while deleting the original inner line from Kachar via the 1933 notification, which Assam side had been insisting all throughout these years that the interstate boundary between Assam and Mizoram be based on this 1933 notification. So now let's quickly talk about the changing boundary lines of Mizoram. As stated earlier, on the basis of the Memorandum of Understanding made between the British India government and the Mizo chiefs in the year 1872, the Bengal Eastern Frontiers Regulation Act was formulated the year after, that is 1873, and finally notified in a government official gazette in 1875 accordingly. Proper boundary marks were also made accordingly as per this notification. However, the British India government notification 1875 had actually been neglected and kept on changing, in fact, pushing deeper and deeper inside the Lushai territory, present Mizoram, simply to suit their commercial interest in the form of tea industry at that time. Finally, the Britishers had, in the year 1933, once again pushed the boundary limit of the ILR forest further inside the Lushai territory. It is important here to note that the fact that there was no more inner line of the ILR forest in the Kachar site, as was made in the beginning of the creation of this 509 square miles, which actually formed a northern boundary between Kachar and Lushai Hills territory of Assam, now known as Kachar and Mizoram. Then there was a new line inside Mizoram, which was supposed to be the outer line for Assam, which is now considered accordingly as the inner line for Mizoram. Hence, it may be noted by all concerned that the inner line nor the outer line of the inner line reserve forest originally within the territory of Mizoram is not to be considered as an interstate boundary between Assam and Mizoram, and that of the interstate boundary forest from the northern side of Mizoram. That fact, however, is that during the last leg of the British India period, that is starting from 1930 to 33, both the inner line and outer of the so-called inner line reserved forest, as could be taken from both Kachar and Mizoram side, were actually shifting more often so in order to confuse the underdeveloped Mizos about their own inner line of the ILR forest and the northern state boundary with Assam. Nevertheless, an area containing both the inner and outer lines has to be marked, and as such in the process, we are having a new defined boundary of the inner line reserve forest based on the 1933 notification, which has been continuing till today. Thus, it has been obvious that the boundary lines of the inner vis-a-vis outer lines of the inner line reserve forest area has been changing, but not the Kachar-Mizoram boundary of 1875. The fact has been that in the long history of the Mizoram-Assam border row, other than Lushai territory as defined, here also there was no marking on ground, no erection of pillar posts based on the 1933 notification, so it was made to be the Mizo District Council territory under Assam, and the same area has been upgraded to the area of Union Territory of Mizoram under the Northeast Areas Reorganization Act 1971, and thereafter to the present state of Mizoram under the Mizoram State Act 1986, and accordingly imposed upon the Mizos that this is their northern boundary. Now let's talk about the status of so-called constitutional boundary. As stated earlier, boundary of Mizoram Union Territory was made under the Northeastern Areas Reorganization Act 1971, and thereafter the same was used for the area of the state of Mizoram under the Mizoram State Act 1986. As such, the so-called constitutional boundary is actually an area that was of the Lushai Hills district, later on Mizo District Council in 1952, then the Mizoram Union Territory in 1972, and again made the area of the 23rd State of Indian Union, the state of Mizoram in 1987 until date. Now, it is highly pertinent to say that the Mizoram government or the Mizos in general have no idea about the exact nature and boundary of our Mizoram in 1933, nor the present boundary of 2020, especially of the boundary line between Mizoram and Assam. Till 1972, since Mizoram was simply a district within Assam, not much attention was given by both Assam State and Mizo District Council. Babies born before 1972 were in fact all born Assamese, hence not much friction till then. However, on the verge of finally separating from Assam as an UT, the true nature of a stepmother was known since then. Now, lo and behold, as Mizoram was emerging a separate identity in the form of Union Territory and under the provisions of the Northeast Areas Reorganization Act 1971, all the newly emerging UT and states which were under the then Assam state boundaries need to be redrawn and in a definite manner. Accordingly, Survey of India during the year 1974, 1975, 1976 and 1981 had carried out necessary surveys in their own capacities to the best of the facilities. As such, the Survey of India completed the necessary delineation and demarcation of the concerned areas bordering between Mizoram and Assam in 6 number of topo sheets, namely topo sheets number 83D7, 83D8, 83D11, 83D12, 83D14 and 83H3 respectively. However, the officials of the Survey of India had diligently admitted in the footnotes of these topo sheets that proper ground verification was not carried out during the surveys. Concerned state governments were not consulted for their concurrence or were all there to see in those topo sheets. Stranger than fiction, the clear footnote made in the 83D8 during the survey period of 1970 to 71 and published as 1981 edition, wherein there has been a note as the interstate boundaries between Assam, Mizoram and Tripura states shown on this map are as interpreted from the Northeastern Areas Reorganization Act 1971, but have yet to be verified, has been somehow deleted in their updated topo sheet during 2004 and 2005 and made its 2010 edition without bothering to have any consultation with Mizoram once again. Therefore, under the present circumstances, it is very much clear that there is no constitutional boundary between Assam, Mizoram as on date. Hence, there cannot be an issue of intrusion by Mizoram at Pinglun, Sayapui and Vairengte at the moment. Now let's actually come to the topic that I've mentioned in the beginning, the what, the why of the problem and how to solve this problem. Finally, let us try to understand the what, the why of a problem, which will give us a clear answer to how to solve our problem. What is the problem? Assam has been harping on the concept and existence of their so-called constitutional boundary, but as for Mizoram, there has been no such line acceptable nor put up to them for acceptance till date under the circumstances as mentioned above in clear terms. In order to make all the hitched hikings clear that it is very important and in fact essential to know and convince ourselves that proper ground verifications were not actually carried out nor the Mizoram UT was ever consulted for their opinion, which is very fundamental to avoid such a problem dealing with any interstate border row. In the process of this, many Mizo villages of the Lushai territory were in fact pulled inside the Assam as per the so-called constitutional boundary. Why it has become such a problem? Let me break down into points. Number 1, Mizos in general since time immemorial had accepted that there has been truly one demarcation between Assam and Mizoram, that is the one drawn, defined and notified by the British India in 1875. Point number 2, the so-called 1933 boundary between Assam and Mizoram has not been actually demarcated nor proper boundary posts, pillar erected, and as such it was too much a hush-hush project made by the outgoing British India regime and a sort of too much overpowering and pushing towards the inner Mizoram than Lushai hills of Assam. As such, it was too much of a temporary imaginary line drawn to satisfy the economic needs of the British tea planters, so it has been difficult to accept the same by Mizoram. How to finally solve the problem? When we have come to know exactly the what and the why of our interstate boundary tussle, any sincere effort in the true spirit of arriving at a permanent solution is guaranteed from a nearby pond. Sincere attempts to solve this problem once and for all by dismantling all the pillars in our calculation and counterclaims by both the sides be made first by the two state governments of Assam and Mizoram, taking into account the historical facts and the subsequent circumstantial events that had taken place under the long period of emerging situations in these disputed areas. There must also be a true brotherhood, actually that of a mother and a daughter relationship spirit at all levels, at any cost, at any time. The boundary lines drawn as per 1875 notification as well as that of 1933 notification must be studied and understood well, and the circumstances under which such changes were made either in the interstate boundaries as well as in redefining of the boundaries of the so-called inner line reserved forest from 1878 till today. Now, lastly, I'm going to make a public appeal to all concerned, such as India Union, Assam and Mizoram. Apart from the two state governments of Assam and Mizoram, the Union Government of India is required to take a truly deep interest in the right honors to finally settle a border disputes of her two states of the Indian Union. One in the spirit of a mother, Assam, and a daughter, Mizoram. If all concerned governments are ready to make extra steps to inculcate a sense of beloved son, Mizoram has been, in spite of all hurdles, have been taking up an independent job as a new independent identity. Further, the Union Government of India as a mediator needs to take into account of the remote possibility of the hyperactive modern generations of Mizo youth drifting back to the romances of an unwanted guest, ill-treated and washed-off imagination in the midst of this great nation, Hindustan. Unmistakably, it would be certainly a great noble vision for the Union government too, that the dream and fantasy of coming home together by all Mizos from the neighboring states of India and neighboring Myanmar and Bangladesh contiguous to each other be taken care of in all honors possible. Long live Mizoram and Mizo Brotherhood. Thank you so much for your patience and for your time. And this video is not made to provoke the two states to start a fight against each other, but it is a request, or indeed I should say it is a kind of an invitation to join hands together and solve each other's disputes by respecting each other. So thank you so much. Kalome. Jai Hind.